Have you noticed that when you try to be everything for her, you end up being nothing for yourself? You mold yourself, adapt, anticipate every desire and every mood, believing it will make her see you as the one. But instead, what you get is distance, coldness, or that empty look that says without words, "You're not the man I want." This doesn't happen because you were too nice. The truth is far more brutal. She didn't feel the presence of a man who knows himself. And a woman, on the deepest level of instinct, does not surrender to someone who isn't a pillar in himself. When your identity is negotiable, when your boundaries bend at every whim, you become predictable. And the predictable loses value. In the silent game of attraction, psychologically, it's the reflection of a weakened ego. Jung once said that the man who does not confront his shadow lives as a servant inside his own castle. You may have the throne in front of you, but you hand over the keys to someone who never deserved them. And, unconsciously, she feels this. She senses that behind the sweet words and constant devotion, there is a man afraid of being alone, and fear is a scent that desire cannot stand. What you call a proof of love might be, for her, confirmation that you are willing to abandon yourself just to keep her around. That's the moment when the emotional field flips. You chase, she retreats. You give, she takes for granted. You insist, she tests. It's like an open castle with no walls, no gates. Anyone can enter, but no one stays. Because value doesn't lie in what you offer without limit, but in what you protect with presence and certainty. The man who knows himself doesn't need to kneel for love, because he knows that when he stands tall, the kind of love worth having is the one that comes toward him. You believe that the more you give, the more she will value you. But there is an invisible line between attention and self-erasure, and once you cross it, your devotion stops being read as love and starts being perceived as weakness. She doesn't feel gratitude. She feels the power is in her hands. And it's at this point that, without realizing it, you become a man who is always available, always ready, always willing, and therefore, always predictable. The mirror of submission reflects what you don't want to see. Your insistence on being present and attentive doesn't spark deep warmth in her. It breeds a cold boredom. Desire doesn't come from what is always within reach, but from what must be earned and preserved with effort. When you give yourself entirely without her having to move a muscle to have you, your emotional value drops. Not because you are worth less, but because human instinct doesn't recognize as valuable something that comes without a fight. The invisible test is always underway. She observes, consciously or not, whether you can maintain yourself even when you desperately want to please her. If you yield to every sign of disapproval, if you retreat at any hint of her dissatisfaction, you are proving that your validation depends entirely on her. And that destroys the field of attraction. A woman may never say it out loud, but internally. She registers. If he needs me this much to feel complete, he's not capable of holding himself together emotionally. The inversion of devotion is the cruelest trap. You think that giving more will bring her closer, but the more you give, the less she feels the need to earn you. It's the psychological law of emotional scarcity. What must be earned is preserved. What is given without filter is discarded. When she sees that you remain close, even while receiving little in return, the internal game ends for her. The instinct to fight for you fades, and all that remains is a one-sided relationship. The emotional cost is high. You not only lose magnetism, but you lose yourself in the process. With each small concession, each boundary ignored, you step further away from the man you could be. Respect cannot survive when your masculine presence is constantly diluted by the need to be accepted. The lion does not ask to be respected. He simply is. He does not bow to prove his worth, because his very existence radiates power and presence. In the same way, the man who maintains his boundaries and protects his identity doesn't need to convince anyone he's worth it. It is Precisely this posture that keeps desire and respect alive. There is a kind of presence that doesn't manifest through the number of words or gestures, but through the strength of silence. A silence that is not the absence of communication, but the presence of self. When you step back consciously, without resentment, without urgency, something begins to stir within her. She notices a space where your constant availability once lived. That space is felt as an emotional vacuum, and the human mind cannot tolerate a vacuum for long. Strategic absence is not disappearance out of immaturity, nor is it a cheap game. It's a deliberate choice to withdraw, to not react to every stimulus, to not respond to every message in seconds. It's allowing her to feel the difference between her life with and without your energy. It's like removing a fragrance from the air. Suddenly, the room feels colder, duller, and she starts searching for the source of what's missing. This is the scarcity effect. The less available you become, the rarer access to your energy becomes. And what is rare becomes valuable. This instinct existed long before social media and dating apps. In any dynamic of desire, excess kills interest. Scarcity fuels imagination. You don't need to vanish for weeks, but you do need a life where she is not the absolute center. Scarcity isn't created by physical distance, but by selective presence. The power of not explaining is a cornerstone of this process. The need to justify every action is a symptom of insecurity. When you over-explain, you're trying to control her perception of you. But when you keep parts of your life and your decisions to yourself, the mystery remains. She doesn't know exactly where you are, who you're with, or what you're thinking, and that uncertainty, far from pushing her away, keeps her interest alive. The unexpected return is the final element in this cycle. Reappearing after she's grown used to your absence creates an emotional shock. It's as if you were a river that, for a time, ran dry. The land learned to live without it. But when the water flows again, it becomes even more precious. This return is not about begging for space in her life, but simply showing that your presence is a choice, not an obligation. When you understand silence as a tool, you realize it is not empty. It is a field charged with energy. It is within this space that desire grows, curiosity intensifies, and your position of value solidifies. What keeps you trapped is not what she does, but what you feel when you're around her. There is an enemy that doesn't appear as a face, but as a void, and that void demands to be filled with her presence and validation. This is the moment when your need for approval becomes the most effective weapon she never even has to hold. You hand that weapon over willingly, hoping she will choose to protect you with it, when in reality, she uses it to test how far you're willing to go to avoid losing what you think you have. The inner enemy is silent and patient. It disguises itself as romance, care, proof of love, but all of that is only the surface of a deeper fear, the fear of not being enough. This fear is the engine of emotional dependency. When it governs you, every gesture from her is interpreted as either approval or rejection. Every silence as a threat, every mood shift as a sign you're about to be discarded. Living this way is exhausting, and it's in that exhaustion that you begin to lose yourself. Self-abandonment happens slowly. It's not a single act, but a sequence of seemingly small concessions. You stop saying what you think to avoid conflict. You give up important moments to be available for her. You tolerate behaviors that violate your self-respect, all in the name of maintaining the illusion of harmony. At first, you tell yourself it's just understanding or patience. But over time, you realize you no longer recognize the man staring back at you in the mirror. The price of insecurity is steep, and it's always paid up front. Every time you show fear of losing her, you unconsciously reinforce the idea that she's in control. And the more obvious this imbalance becomes, the more desire dissipates. Female attraction is not fueled by the certainty of possession, but by the perception of value. And value is not seen in a man who begs for space in her life, but in a man who knows his presence is a privilege, not a desperate need. Reclaiming territory starts with something more internal than external. It's not about sending the perfect message, changing your tone of voice, or learning clever lines. It's about reclaiming your inner voice, the one that can say no without fear, and yes with conviction. It's about rebuilding the walls of your castle, not to isolate yourself, but to remind yourself that anyone who enters must be willing to respect the space you've built. The warrior who kneels to beg for love lays down his sword. And without the sword, he is no longer a warrior, but a prisoner in a battlefield he chose to enter unarmed. When you reclaim your sword, your clarity, your presence, your boundaries, you don't have to fight for respect. It simply returns to you. Some relationships are not born to be a refuge, but a proving ground. In this type of bond, love stops being a space of giving and becomes a hunting ground, where every gesture is interpreted as either an advance or a retreat, and every silence as a trap set in the right place. This is not the kind of love that strengthens. It's the kind that measures strength. And for many men, stepping into this territory happens without them even realizing it. Driven by a genuine desire to please, yet sustained by a dynamic that, deep down, places both sides on opposing teams. The feminine hunt, when it happens, is not always for the man himself, but for the sense of control he offers when he shows dependency. It's subtle. She tests how much you can take without complaining, how much you yield without confronting, how much you bend to her will. And when she sees that you are willing to sacrifice almost anything just to keep the connection alive, the game changes. You stop being the prize and become the prey, predictable, accessible, easy to direct, in the hunting ground. The most exploited male vulnerability is the fear of loss. That fear is like blood in the water. It sharpens her instinct to test, pull away, and then return at the exact moment you believe she's gone for good. It's in this push and pull that your energy is drained. Always trying to interpret signals, always chasing an equilibrium that, in truth, never existed. The man who doesn't see this dynamic ends up believing his salvation lies in winning more, giving more, proving more. But paradoxically, that is exactly what pushes him further away from becoming attractive again. The true reversal only happens when he removes himself from the hunting game, not with theatrical indifference, but with a quiet presence that shows he is not competing for affection. The hunter who does not react to bait becomes, in the eyes of the one playing the game, a mystery impossible to control. In this setting, emotional control is more than a virtue. It's a survival strategy. It stops you from reacting impulsively to every provocation and keeps you anchored in your own value instead of navigating by her mood. It's like a wild animal that, instead of bolting in fear, stands firm, knowing that the one who runs first reveals his vulnerability. The man who masters this state is no longer seen as an easy resource, but as someone who can choose where to direct his attention, and when the choice is his, the hunt changes direction. She begins to wonder what she must do to win back the space she once thought was guaranteed. Being the prize is not about placing yourself above others. It's about becoming someone whose presence is rare, whose value is undeniable, and whose absence is felt. It is the opposite of chasing. It is standing at the center of yourself, so steady that anyone who comes close feels they are in the presence of something that cannot be bought or taken by force. This state is not born from surface-level tactics, but from the quiet labor of inner construction. The man who becomes the prize is not in constant competition for female validation. He doesn't need to prove anything because he lives in alignment with his own worth. Every choice, every boundary, every absence is a reflection of the clarity he holds about himself. He understands that it is not the excess of presence that fuels desire, but the quality of the energy he gives when he is present. When a man positions himself this way, the dynamic changes. He stops competing in the arena of neediness and begins attracting in the arena of scarcity. What is scarce becomes desirable. What is not always available becomes more valuable. It is in this space that he awakens a form of attraction that doesn't depend on constant effort, but on the simple maintenance of his integrity. This posture, however, requires discipline. It's easy to say you don't need anyone while your heart screams the opposite. Being the prize is not about armoring yourself against affection, but about allowing it in only when it's genuine. It means refusing relationships that demand you shrink your essence to be accepted. It means understanding that forced presence is emotional charity, and emotional charity never builds respect. The man who becomes the prize is in no rush. He knows that time is an ally and that any woman who wants him will have to recognize his value without him putting himself up for auction. He doesn't fear loss, because he knows that losing someone who doesn't recognize his value is, in truth, a gain. And it is precisely this calm in the face of potential loss that makes him magnetic, because it reveals that his center is not in someone else, but firmly within himself. Love bows before the one who remains whole. When a man knows himself, he doesn't beg for space, he naturally occupies it. He doesn't seek to be accepted at any cost, because he has already accepted himself before any external validation. This knowledge doesn't come from logic alone, but from walking through emotional storms and realizing that, in the end, the only territory he truly needs to conquer is his own inner world. A man who knows himself doesn't fear silence, doesn't fear distance, and doesn't fear endings. He understands that genuine love is not sustained by pressure, but by choice, and that choice is only free when both remain standing, without one having to kneel so the other can feel taller. Respect is born from this horizontal ground, when admiration is mutual and not built on submission. When he reaches this point, his energy shifts. He no longer negotiates essential boundaries, no longer offers explanations for every move, and no longer lives in fear of being misunderstood. He speaks with clarity, without the weight of constant appeasement. And that clarity is a beacon. It draws those ready to walk alongside him, and repels those seeking only to control. Love, in the presence of such a man, bows. Not because he demands it, but because his posture invites respect. He doesn't require the other to bend, yet his firmness awakens the desire to be near. And when love bows in this way, there is no more room for power games, only for the conscious giving of those who know that being together is a choice, not a desperate need. This is the point where the entire journey makes sense. The man who once sought to be chosen realizes that the greatest triumph is choosing himself. And it is precisely for this reason that, when he knows himself, love draws near, not as something to be conquered, but as the inevitable consequence of his own presence.